Hello, this is Pretty Guardian, and I am coming to you. It is Friday night, and I just got off work. I've been drinking Monster Energy drinks. You know, that Papillon flavor is really just popping. And tonight, I want to talk to you about the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Nevin. I was very interested in this book because it is basically about this friendship between this girl Sadie and this guy Sam, and it takes place over several decades of their life, and they are both game developers. So this book kind of hits that like pop culture reference point, that intersection of literature and gaming. So I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to talk about this book. First off, I didn't really have strong feelings. When you're really passionate about something, it's really easy to talk about. When you really hate something, it's really easy to talk about. It gives you that animus to really describe what worked or didn't work about the material for you. I was feeling kind of about this one. But the other thing is I didn't really know if people wanted to hear me, somebody who talks about gaming, also talk about books. So I threw up a community post earlier in the day, and the response was pretty positive. So I decided, you know what, let's talk about this book. And just to give you a little bit of a spoiler warning, I'm not going to be telling you about any like twists or major like plot turns or anything like that. But I do want to talk about a couple parts of the book that really impacted me and that I think maybe you should hear about. I'm also going to throw in a trigger warning there because it does kind of have to do with essay. One of the things that I think that the author did very well is her recurring use of motifs throughout the book. So when you look at the cover of the book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, one of the things that you'll notice in the background is a print of the Great Wave, which is by a Japanese artist named Hokusai. And his work was really popular, or at least like he was making it in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So Sadie and Sam, one of the games that they developed together, is artistically based off of that print. But it doesn't just stop there. There's a lot of references to Emily Dickinson's poems. For example, one of the games that Sadie develops is called Emily Blaster. And basically you have this like ink gun that shoots the words from Emily Dickinson's poems until it like creates the full poem. And one of the things that I think is cool is as a promotional tool, they actually made a little version of this game that you can play. So I went and played this game, and I will say that the game was actually fun. I enjoyed it. The downside is that it's only 3 stages. And so each stage gets progressively a little bit harder because the words kind of bounce around a little faster and with a little more agitation to them. But ultimately, the gameplay is not very varied. You can finish those 3 levels very quickly. So it's not much of a full game, but as a promotional tool, I thought it was very clever, very cute. And I will say that I actually had fun with it. When I finished the book, I really wasn't sure how I felt about it. So I went and I watched some interviews with Gabrielle where she was talking about the book and her experience with it. And a couple things that I think are worth noting in there is that first off, I feel like she really understood her book and the material that was in it. I feel like this was a story that was very personal and very meaningful for her. And in a lot of ways, she actually told it very well. For example, by tying those motifs throughout the story. And thematically, one of the things that she was talking about is how in video games, you have sort of this endless possibility. Like you can make mistakes over and over and over again and just keep replaying the levels until you get it right. And in a lot of ways, we don't always have that grace in the real world. You know, sometimes you make a mistake and that's the end. What I think that we see with Sadie and Sam is by looking at their friendship across all these decades, across all the mistakes that they've made and the problems that they have, you kind of see them replaying these scenarios in their friendship over and over again. And so there is kind of this breadth of possibility that comes with life and with friendship too. I do think that there is some impact in how she was able to capture that. There are a few ways where I think that this quickly breaks down though. I don't really feel like there was much of a plot to this story. There was no overarching problem that needed to be solved. The threads that kind of connected the story were just very weak to me, because outside of that element of friendship and seeing these sort of vignettes of their friendship, there wasn't really a whole lot going on. The first like 2/3 of the book were pretty good. And then by the time you got to the third act of the book, it almost felt like she was just kind of throwing things against the wall to make things happen. This book seems like something where during the editing phase, they probably could have cut out 20% of it and made a stronger book overall for it. Spoiler number 1 here. One of the areas where you see that reflected the most is in the chapter Pioneer, where it actually takes place within one of the video games that was made in the story. And overall, I actually liked that chapter. When you look at kind of how it fits in with the rest of the story, it does kind of seem like this kind of crazy plot device thrown in there. There's kind of a lot of these, like one minute you'll be reading the chapter from Sam's perspective, then the next you're reading it from Sadie's perspective, then it's an interview in IGN magazine, then suddenly you're thrust into this video game. The whole thing feels very all over the place. While I enjoyed each of these little tidbits on their own, as far as connecting the overall narrative that was happening, it just didn't do that for me. People described her work as being very pretentious, and I definitely felt that in the writing. There are a few things, for example, she uses a lot of really like big and sometimes esoteric words. Grokking. I didn't know what the fuck grokking was, but she said it a couple times. And when I looked it up afterwards, I was kind of like, oh, you could have just said that they were vibing together. Come on. And then there was other words like verboten and some other ones that were in there as well. And then there were certain things in her manner of writing. For example, she would use had together, like because her teeth were rotting out, she had to go to the dentist. And while grammatically that may have been technically correct within the book, I can tell you that as a reader, when I read it together, it reads like a double negative and it kind of blocks me out from what I was reading. It breaks my immersion. I have to kind of pull back and do a double take and go, wait, what did I just read? What did that mean? What was she trying to say? If it happens once, okay, whatever. But it happened multiple times in the story. And I think she probably could have rephrased some of those sentences altogether, and it would have been a lot easier to read. The final thing I want to talk about, and this is another spoiler here, there is a character in the book named Dove. And so when Sadie starts out in college, she's doing some game design courses, and Dove is one of her instructors in them. They portray him as just kind of this asshole. Like he is constantly negging her and his students. Like he just has kind of a mean thing to say about everybody. And so she's deeply seeking his approval on her work and herself as a person. And they end up starting a relationship together. In that relationship, like first off, I think that it's inappropriate on its face. She shouldn't be sleeping with a professor, not even from her perspective. Like the professor shouldn't be sleeping with her. He's also a married man with children. So like that's super gross. But okay, you know, it can make for some good drama, whatever. But then there is this specific scene where she doesn't want to have sex with him and she just kind of resigns herself like, I guess I won't fight with him. I'll just let him fuck me. And so I have a couple thoughts on that. Like, first off, that's the R word to me. There are multiple times in the book where she makes a big deal about how like, oh, well, he never forced himself on me. He had my consent, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, in that moment, you did not give him consent. Like there was no emphatic, like, yes, she wanted this. In fact, there were a lot of times where she slept with him in this book and she didn't want it. And it was super fucking gross. There does come a point in the story where she acknowledges that what happened between her and him was really fucked up and shouldn't have happened, but she doesn't quite seem to understand why. She doesn't grow from it. Nothing bad happens to Dev. In fact, she still continues to seek his approval in the story. It's really bizarre, and I think it was very poorly handled. And there was a part of me that was like, you know what? I remember what it was like to be in my early 20s and desperately seeking approval and using sex to try and get that. And I just don't feel like that was accurately captured here. Like She captured the disgusting part of it, but kind of nothing else. And it doesn't even feel like she fully recognizes how bad that was. So I don't know. I have really complex feelings about that. At the end of the day, I would probably give this book 3 out of 5 stars. I'm really surprised that it's made so many bestseller lists and that they're going to make a movie out of it. I really can't imagine that it's going to make a good movie. I could consider maybe like a Netflix miniseries or something, just because of how the book jumps around in time periods and has those sorts of vignettes. I feel like it would lend itself really well to an episodic type show. But when I think about what it would look like in a movie, they're going to have to do some major revisions if they want it to be any good. Anyways, thank you so much for watching along today. I hope you enjoyed my review and insight into the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Nevin. And until next time, this is Pretty Guardian, logging out.